At Digital History Pioneers Foundation, we are about grassroots history on digital platforms. That means we are about podcasters, documentarians, YouTubers, and even TikTokers. All of these creators are out there trying to share their love of history with the public. They don't need ideas, they need funding, both from viewers and corporate donors. DH Pioneers' initial funding focus is on the Civil War era, with a special emphasis on the Addressing Gettysburg podcast. So be a vital part of the unique content Addressing Gettysburg has in store by donating at dhpioneers.com and help bring your love of history to the people. Digital History Pioneers is an IRS Section 501c3 approved charitable corporation that makes any donation tax deductible to the fullest extent of the law.
From the Gettysburg Museum of History Studios, you're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg's Ask a Gettysburg Guide. And today we are talking about something that is obscure, but should not be obscure. It is Orland Smith's Brigade on Smith's Ridge, which I'm going to guess is your name for it, right? That's not officially...
That is not an official name, whatever official means, but no, it is a name that I've given it as shorthand, as an easy identifier.
Okay, and that's Stu Dempsey, licensed battlefield guide. How long have you been a guide for, Stu?
This is the end of my 21st year.
21st year, okay. So we're going to believe what Stu says here, because he's been doing this long enough. And also, but this is a particularly special brigade to you, right? You have a familial connection, if I'm not mistaken?
I do indeed. One of the regiments in Smith's Brigade, the 73rd Ohio Infantry, I had two ancestors that served in the brigade. Both of them end up losing their lives at this battle. One killed just a few hundred yards from where we sit on the morning of July 2nd. The other wounded in the same action, severely wounded, who will die of that injury on the George Spangler farm 6 days later. So, yes, there's very definitely a personal connection here.
And also, I think probably most famously, people know that President Richard Nixon's grandfather was killed here, but he received his wound out on Smith's Ridge.
Yes, he did. And while the limited documentation on this isn't altogether helpful, it may well have been in the same firefight that my two ancestors.
Oh, wow. Okay. And of course, we don't know for sure because it was momentous at the time, because nobody knew then that his grandson would become president. Right, so nobody thought to make a big deal out of it.
No, just another dead man, another dead farmer from Vinton County, Ohio. Yeah.
Right. All right. So, let's get started with this then. Tell us about, first of all, so Smith's Brigade is in the 11th Corps, they're von Steinmeier's division, correct?
That's right.
All right. What happens the beginning of the battle? They're not here right away, but they come up during the first. Start us from there and take us through.
Sure. And do you want a little bit of
pre-battle history?
Pre-battle context for
Sure. Yeah, actually, that'd be good. Because they didn't fight together until like Chancellorsville. Is that right?
Somewhat. Yeah, I'll clarify that.
Okay, go ahead.
So I guess you want to begin the story with the two Ohio regiments in the brigade. And by the way, Smith's Brigade, as it's configured at the Battle of Gettysburg, consists of the 55th Ohio, the 73rd Ohio, 136th New York, and 33rd Massachusetts, numbering altogether just a bit over 1,600 officers and men. The two Ohio regiments, 55th and 73rd, have a pretty active service history prior to Gettysburg, in that both regiments were formed in late 1861, both deployed to Western Virginia early in 1862. They see a fair amount of both small-scale combat and physical hardship in operating in the mountains of Western Virginia and then in the Shenandoah Valley in the spring of 62. And their biggest fight of the war in terms of casualties comes at the Second Battle of Bull Run, or Manassas, where both regiments fought very well in a losing fight and sustained heavy losses as a consequence. Now, at Second Bull Run, they were not yet part of the Army of the Potomac. They belonged to Franz Sigel's First Corps of the short-lived Army of Virginia, John Pope's Army of Virginia. But in the aftermath of the Union defeat at Second Bull Run, Pope is replaced, sent elsewhere, and his forces are folded into the Army of the Potomac. At that point, Sigel's Corps becomes the 11th, and the 73rd and 55th end up as well in this new 11th Corps, where they are shortly going to be combined with two brand new regiments just entering the Army in the late summer, early fall of 62. This is part of the major call-up of forces the Lincoln administration is making in the summer of 62. That starts to bear fruit in the early fall. Ultimately, 11 new regiments are going to be added to the 11th Corps over the course of the fall and winter. And it does force a reorganization somewhat of the Corps, of the various brigades in the Corps. And Colonel Smith, who'd been leading the 73rd Ohio from the very beginning, is made a brigade commander. He's given his own 73rd Ohio as a veteran nucleus for the brigade, and then also his ranks will be filled out with three of these new regiments, the 134th New York, the 136th New York, and the 33rd Mass. There's another change after Chancellorsville, and by the way, the brigade at Chancellorsville is commanded by Francis Barlow. Barlow was assigned to the brigade. He kind of bumps Colonel Smith, who goes back to his regiment. Barlow leads the brigade at the one fight, Chancellorsville, where they are minimally engaged. Their casualties are very light. They're not part of the massive attack that strikes the 11th Corps on May 2nd. And in the aftermath of Chancellorsville, there's another reorganization, and the 134th New York's transferred out of the brigade. The 55th Ohio, old friends of the 73rd from the Shenandoah Valley days, are transferred back in. And as Barlow is going to be made a division commander after Chancellorsville, Colonel Smith gets his brigade back. So as we approach the Gettysburg campaign then, as I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, it's the 55th and 73rd Ohio, the 136th New York, and the 33rd Mass under Colonel Smith. Smith is an interesting guy. Almost the entirety of his adult life is spent in the railroading industry. Other than essentially 3 years that he serves in the United States Army during the Civil War, it's a very railroad life for him. He's born in Maine in 1825. Following career choices, he ends up in Chillicothe, Ohio. That's south central Ohio. By the early 1850s, becomes a rather prominent citizen and also gets involved in the town of Chillicothe's local militia company, the Chillicothe Grays. And on the strength of that admittedly very minimal military experience, when the 73rd Ohio is authorized to be raised in south central Ohio, Smith gets the colonelcy. Now, he's one of hundreds of regimental commanders that begin the Civil War with essentially zero military knowledge, but he will also be one of the many who do quite well, who figure it out, who adapt and become pretty competent commanders. I have never come up with an account of a single member of his brigade that had anything to say about Smith that wasn't glowingly positive. Not a single man has said anything differently. A captain in the 55th Ohio later wrote, Smith's record as a brave, wise, and far-sighted commander was unsurpassed. His memory will always be cherished by those he led so wisely and cared for with such sympathy. While the colonel of the 33rd Massachusetts later noted, Smith was loved and admired by all in the 33rd. So a good, competent, not terribly egotistical officer who absolutely commanded the respect of his soldiers.
What do you know where the name Orland comes from?
I don't. It's not one I encounter a lot. I mean, usually there's an O attached to the end there.
Right. I mean, it sounds Spanish is what I'm thinking, but but there's no O. Then
there's no indication in his northern New England roots of any Spanish activity there.
Interesting.
But yeah, it is a different. I don't think I've ever encountered another Orland without the O. So
no, I can't think of ever hearing of one. No, except for Orlando. Right? Yeah, plenty of those.
Be a good name for a cat, though.
Orland.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. All right. So he. Okay. Continue with whatever you want to say.
So as we look at this brigade on the eve of the Battle of Gettysburg, two of the regiments, the two Ohio regiments, are very highly experienced. They're veterans of small and big battles. They've seen a lot of action. They've taken a lot of casualties. They're command structure is experienced and competent. The two other regiments, the ones that had been assigned prior to Chancellorsville, well, the 136th New York and the 33rd Massachusetts have yet to see much in the way of major fighting. As I said, both units had been initially organized in the late summer, early fall of 62. And although they have now been in the service for, well, approaching a year by the time this battle is fought, they are certainly well-trained, well-disciplined, seasoned troops. They know what they're doing. They know how to perform in a battlefield, but they have not had any serious battle experience yet. That's going to change for them on the 2nd of July here, for sure.
Now, at Chancellorsville, they're under Barlow's command. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, and Barlow is detached from the 11th Corps to go to Catherine Furnace, I think, and help the 3rd Corps. Is that right?
Yeah, that's about it. Unfortunately, and the timing on this is truly unfortunate. Not terribly long before Jackson's Confederate Corps unleashes a massive onslaught into the flank of the 11th, Barlow's brigade is detached. They are sent, yes, to support 3rd Corps activities, which, to their credit, takes them away from the slaughterhouse that's going to be inflicted on the rest of the 11th Corps.
Yeah.
I mean, their casualties number in the teens as opposed to in the several hundreds. At the same time, that missing brigade deprived the 11th Corps of its only really strong reserve, so with some consequences, I think, for that corps. But yeah, they see very little action in their tenure under Barlow. Now Barlow's got a divisional command, so Orland Smith is back.
And when does he rise to division?
Don't recall the exact date. I think it's prior to mid-May.
Okay.
It's within 2 or 3 weeks of Chancellor.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure about that.
And is that because who was his division commander at the time? Was he taken out or something, or transferred, or?
Well, he goes to command the 1st Division, which had been led by Charles Devens at Chancellorsville. Right. Yeah. And there's a couple of problems with Charles Devens at Chancellorsville. He is wounded in that fight, and he's also probably halfway to drunk in that fight. So he's out of the picture for a while, but he will rebound. He'll get a division in the Army of the James later. So being a drunk on the battlefield isn't necessarily a career inhibitor.
I would imagine not, when everybody else seems to be.
Yeah. I mean, you've got plenty of colleagues.
Yeah.
It's an outfit that is well trained. Half the regiments are highly veteran. The other two will be seeing their first combat here.
All right. Now, so here they arrive on July 1st, but not much really goes on for them except for maybe some sharpshooter activity. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. They would have been the last of the 11th Corps brigades to reach Gettysburg on the 1st. The whole corps, as listeners may recall, had been based around Emmitsburg, Maryland on the morning of July 1st. Their orders were to proceed up to Gettysburg in support of John Reynolds' 1st Corps. And at about 8 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of July, the 11th Corps begins to file out of Emmitsburg for the march north. But at the very tail end of the column is Smith's brigade, which ensures they will arrive as the dead last 11th Corps unit. And they are held back on Cemetery Hill as the last-ditch reserve, if you will, while the other brigades of the 11th Corps march through town out to the northern plain where they'll fight and ultimately be defeated later in the afternoon. So Smith's men get out of July 1st with only a couple of casualties. Again, they'd been in reserve the entire afternoon and evening. The couple of casualties they suffer are from little sharpshooter exchanges, things like that. And they do move around a good bit as a brigade on Cemetery Hill that evening, and it appears what's being done is, since it's the only really intact Union fighting force on the field until at least the 12th Corps arrives in force, well, they're going to have to stand tall, and this means trying to essentially psych out the Confederates by shifting the brigade around, shifting some of its regiments around, trying to look like you've got a more powerful force to defend the hill than you actually do.
Yeah, because so he's in Steinwehr's division. Yeah. And so he's only got 2 brigades, and they're left on the hill as a reserve, but Coster is sent up to help with the retreat.
Yeah.
And he's ripped apart.
Yeah.
So really, that is leaving only Orland Smith until other units start arriving. Okay. And I think for everybody watching at home or listening at home, if you can, go to Google Earth and pull up the southern part of Gettysburg. And the reason why I say that is because what we're going to be talking about now is an area of the field that is no longer anything like what it was in 1863. We're talking about the southern end of town, Steinway Avenue, which is the tourist area of town. So we've got our McDonald's, our KFC, our Friendlies, the hotels, ABC, Blessing Restaurant, all these things down there for tourists to do. And then behind that, we have Colt Park and the hospital. And so we've got a neighborhood, a modern neighborhood that was just farm fields during that time. Now, Stu's going to send me to edit in a couple of digitized photos of this area taken from Cemetery Hill. And it's very interesting. Do you have those photos now? Because I want to show the live audience at least. And I'll edit this in later. Because what's interesting about it is, and I'll give you an idea if you can't pull up Google anything. So here's the photo from the perspective of Cemetery Hill. And these white lines here are the headstones for the soldiers' graves. And you can see they're above the grass. Today, they're flush with the grass. But back then, they weren't. So that's what that is there, in case that throws you off. Looks like a wall. Is that a wall I'm looking at there?
That is the National Cemetery Wall.
Okay, that's the National Cemetery Wall, which is on the other side of that is the Taneytown Road. Mm-hmm. So imagine the Taneytown Road is going like this. This barn is not here anymore, but what's there now?
Essentially, that is across from where the 73rd Ohio's monument is today.
So is that by the Reliance Mine?
It's very near the Reliance Mine. It's sort of where the old National Cemetery with its wall connects to the cemetery annex.
Okay. So it's across from the miniature soldier place.
Yeah, it's kind of across from the miniature soldier place, almost across from Colton.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So behind the Colton Blessing Restaurant, miniature soldiers, that area there. Beyond it here, this is where we're talking about, Smith's Ridge. It's kind of hard to tell, but you can kind of see this fence line curves. Smith's is very hard to point to when you're doing it like this. But the fence line curves. How do I go that way? There we go. Okay. And it curves up onto the ridge. And then beyond, we have the McMillan Farm buildings up there on Seminary Ridge. So that's where we are. Now, for those of you watching the recorded version of this at a later date, I'll have that where it's much more clear for you to see. Also, kind of the converse of this, not really, but taken up Cemetery Hill from down, I guess, around Steinway Avenue, sort of.
That would have been taken pretty near where the Appalachian Brewing Company is. Ah,
okay.
That neighborhood.
Perfect. So this stone wall, there's two stone walls here. This is the Taneytown Road. And then moving up, you can see these darker spots are actually people on the hill for the dedication ceremonies. And then it's very faint here, but you see this flagpole. My finger's going all, it's like my finger is drunk. It doesn't want to go where I want it to go. But this is the big, huge, tall flagpole. And I guess that's where the speaker's rostrum might have been, probably, or near where it might have been.
Yes, and you can see the gatehouse, of course,
there's
toward the
left.
Yeah.
So now, I think it's very important to note that there's no trees on Cemetery Hill. Okay, that's the way it was during the battle. That's why it was so evident to anybody walking by it that if you had an army, you had to be on that hill.
Yeah,
you can control with your artillery for miles around, right?
Yes.
And so that just gives us a better idea. Because when you go there today, you don't get a sense of that. I mean, you get a sense that there's a hill, but you don't get a sense of just how big this hill is because of all of the buildings and trees and modern life that is on it.
Yeah, it's just not as dominating a position now as it would have been a century and a half ago. There is a reason why One of Corps Commander Oliver Howard's staff officers says, "General, this is the only position."
Yeah. Yes. So, okay. So there we are. So Orland Smith. So if you go on Google Earth and do this if you can, orient it north to south, and then that way, like, let's in our mind, let's talk like that, like we're looking at it north to south, and direct people west or whatever as we're going along. Also, if you have the Lano map book, that might help you as well. Okay, so go ahead.
So we want the parameters of the ridge area, sure, or the parameters of this fight.
The whole thing.
Okay. So again, using predominantly modern landmarks, since there's really not much historic I can work with over there. Let's call the eastern boundary of this battlefield the Emmitsburg Road / Steinver Avenue, which really runs kind of northeast to southwest. The western boundary would be the old portion of Long Lane, which runs southwest. Much of the northeast to southwest section of Long Lane does follow the approximate trace of the original sunken road that was there. It changes a little bit in its southernmost section, but if you use Long Lane on Google Earth, you will have the western edge, essentially, of this battlefield. The northern boundary would simply be the Gettysburg Hospital campus. Or the old Lincoln Cemetery. That immediate neighborhood would be the northern boundary. And the southern boundary would be where the post-war east-west section of Long Lane is. There's the north to south or northeast to southwest Long Lane that is largely an original trace, and then there is a much more recent east to west section. And that east to west section provides a pretty good sense for the southernmost edge of this battlefield.
So we have a listener who just sent a question in, and he says, it's Jason Hamby, and he says, did Reynolds err in creating too large a perimeter to defend, forcing Howard to conform to that line?
Are we referring to July 1st? Or?
July 1st. I think, there's going to be a delay with the question sometimes.
Yeah.
So I think what he's asking is with Reynolds going out north and west of town, or I guess Buford really, and then Reynolds following up on that, was that too large a perimeter for Howard to hold? And then, in your opinion, I guess.
Causing the inevitable fallback
Correct.
to Cemetery
Yes,
Hill.
yes.
Okay, I gotcha. Well, yeah, it is too large a perimeter to hold. It's also not really a perimeter that's determined by Reynolds. When Reynolds gets onto the battlefield, first off, it's a highly fluid situation and a very small battle at that point. At the time of Reynolds' death, there's exactly 2 federal brigades of infantry engaged and really 1 brigade of cavalry seriously engaged, and they're facing a similar Confederate force. So Reynolds focuses on the immediate tactical problem, which is the Confederates are pushing eastward. They've pretty well fought out what Buford's cavalry is able to accomplish. Got to get the infantry in, got to take over the fight, and then he's done. So he's not appointing where Howard's troops are going to arrive, who don't arrive for like another hour and a half to 2 hours anyway. So he'll be long dead by the time Howard's on the field and has to determine where he's going to defend.
And also, do you think, though, that the intent was to hold that ground or to delay for the rest of the... I always look at it like Buford is out there delaying for Reynolds. Reynolds comes up to delay for the army. But he has to know that is not ground that you can easily hold. The better ground is south of town.
Yeah. So
it's a delay till the rest of the army can come up and get on that ground. Or at least that's the way it worked out. But do you think that was... It had to be evident to him. If it's evident to me, but maybe that's hindsight.
Well, a couple things on that. I do think anybody with a modicum of military knowledge or a good military sense of terrain would have looked at the 1863 version of Cemetery Hill and said, wow, I need to hold that. That's really going to be a linchpin for me. Now, getting back to the movie and all that stuff, Buford is a division commander of cavalry. He doesn't get to pick where the Army of the Potomac fights. So let's just set him aside.
Okay.
With all due respect, we'll set him aside.
Sure.
Reynolds does have a lot more authority in that department, being commander of not only a corps, but of the Army's left wing. But, the truth is we don't really know what Reynolds' intent was exactly because he's not around long enough to give us a good sense for that. We know he conferred with Howard on the night of the 30th. Howard describes this, but Howard doesn't give us a major clue either as to what Reynolds is really thinking about the next day or what the next day might bring. So if you want to look at who chooses the Gettysburg battlefield as it looks on the afternoon of July 1st, that is much more Oliver Howard.
Okay.
Howard, when he gets onto the field, and that is sometime late morning. His first stop is Cemetery Hill, where he and his staff officer Meisenberg both say, yeah, this is a really awesome hill and we need to hold this. That's not a direct quote. And they then ride down into town. Howard climbs up onto the roof of the Fonstock building to get a better view of what was still probably the tail end of the morning's fighting. He talks about seeing some fighting going on at that moment, which is probably the tail end of the railroad cut fight, maybe. But it's from the roof of the Fonstock building where he receives the news that Reynolds is dead. First, he's told Reynolds is wounded. Then he's told, no, he's dead, and that he's in charge. And so he's going to start formulating a plan as to what to do with his corps when it reaches the battlefield, because Howard's going to get here a couple hours before his men are.
Right.
Corps commander on a horse travels a lot farther than a bunch of guys on foot.
Right.
And the plan that he comes up with is to essentially leave the First Corps in its positions on the north-south running ridges west of town, and he's going to take 2/3 of the 11th Corps and move them up onto Oak Hill, which at that moment was still unoccupied by anybody. So what he would be doing would be prolonging the line of the First Corps, presumably securing their right flank on a really good piece of high ground. That's what Howard has in mind. In the time that passes between Howard formulating this idea and the troops arriving to implement the idea, the situation changes as Robert Rodes' Confederate division, the biggest in Lee's army, gets to Oak Hill first. So with a heavily occupied chunk of high ground that Howard's going to know immediately we can't drive them off that, then that plan becomes null and void. And plan B, if you want to call it that, is a delaying action. And this is where Howard will have his troops deploying on the northern plain. And I think in Howard's mind, this is absolutely a delaying action.
Yeah.
We know there are other elements of the Army nearby, 12th Corps, 3rd Corps. We know that both Reynolds and then later Howard are sending communications to those Corps commanders saying, hey, we're in an increasingly difficult fight here. Please arrive. But until they do, the best thing he can do is create a window of time. And obviously it ends in defeat for the 1st Corps and for the 11th Corps. Both those units get mauled, really mauled, and driven back in a, at times, confusing retreat. It has been suggested by a few people, I guess, that, well, wouldn't it have been a great idea, and of course Monday morning quarterbacking is what it is, but would not it have been a great idea for sometime around that noontime-ish lull that descends on the battlefield, which is only a relative lull because there's artillery shells flying, but wouldn't it have been a good idea then to pull back all those 1st Corps and 11th Corps troops back to around the Cemetery Hill position while you could probably disengage without too much hardship,
right,
and before the enemy gets even more troops into the neighborhood? I'm going to leave the last word on that to Howard's senior division commander, that's Major General Carl Schurz. He addresses that question some decades after the battle. Says he was asked, why didn't you guys just pull back to that high ground, around early afternoon? And he said it was his view that although the suspicion was it was going to be a losing fight, which it turns out to be, his view was that if they could bloody the Confederates sufficiently, if they could delay them sufficiently, that would give time, again, for other forces to arrive and occupy those heights, and then he might fall back to those heights. So it is essentially an effort to defend as far away as possible from the ultimate
goal
ground you want to hold on to. Much better to defend away from that final last ditch than on it.
Yeah.
And Schurz's take was, if we had pulled back, say, noon, 1 o'clock, it would have given the Confederates all afternoon and evening till roughly 7:30 p.m., if you want to go by daylight, to put together a large, cohesive, well-thought-out, properly supported attack on Cemetery Hill, and who knows what happens then.
Yeah.
In this case, I think the proof is that the Confederates have been sufficiently bloodied by this delaying action that they are not capable of throwing an attack against Cemetery Hill that evening.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of that is Ewell's Corps and his, the if practicable order. First of all, he's waiting on a fresh division that's in a traffic jam, and the men that he has at his disposal are disorganized still because they all scattered about when they're going through the town chasing the Yanks. And you got to believe that some guys are stopping to rob some bodies, and and they're exhausted. They're exhausted. They've taken casualties.
Rhodes' division is, I wouldn't exactly say wrecked. It is severely damaged.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
So it's, like I always say, like I just said earlier to the people who took the guide exam, all in due time, right? Everything has its moment and everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. And so that's just the way it went. Okay. Just to let you know, Ron Moore says that he's watching this sitting in the Best Western, literally inside the boundaries that we are describing.
Okay. Nice.
So let's do this for Ron. Okay.
Yeah.
So go ahead. So continue where we interrupted you from.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, you've clearly indicated correctly that these boundaries that I've provided to everyone for this battlefield do not look a single thing like they did then. Again, it's all houses and businesses and asphalt. But within that, there are a handful of remaining structures from prior to the battle. There are still a handful of survivors dotting the landscape. There's the Stock House, a.k.a. the Swan Tavern on Washington Street. Almost next to that is the Wysotsky Barbahan House, which is this 1.5-story stone house that looks kind of like a carbon copy of Lee's headquarters.
Oh, yeah.
So that's another one. Yeah. The Dobbin House Restaurant, back then the Pierce House, is also on this battlefield. And then finally the George House.
That was on the guide exam.
Ah, was it? Okay, well, cool. Now, there were actually several other farm buildings, little clusters of buildings, that would have been in front of Smith's main position. Those houses are all gone now, but at least there are a handful of survivors. So I think we left off the brigade reaching Gettysburg on the afternoon of the 1st.
Right. And you had left off that they were kind of shifted around to make it look like
make
they
a show
had,
of force. Yeah, make a show of force. And it's also at that point where I think probably any brigade commander in the Army of the Potomac has his own Hancock encounter moment story. So Smith has one of these on the evening of the first. At some point, Hancock rides up, being Hancock,
right?
And he finds Smith because, of course, Smith's brigade is there in line of battle, intact, ready to go, and. He confronts Smith and said, "This position should be held at all hazards. Now, Colonel, will you hold it?" And Smith replied, I think I can, General." Hancock's reply in a much louder tone of voice was, "Will you hold it?" And then Smith, of course, understands the nature of the conversation and says, "Yes, sir, I will hold it." So he has his moment. But in the end, of course, as we know, the Confederates don't test the Cemetery Hill defenses on that evening of July 1st. And right about 10 o'clock in the evening, Smith's brigade will finally be pulled out of the front line for a few hours of needed rest. And the second in command, Major Samuel Hurst, wrote of that night, they were sent to the Evergreen Cemetery for a quick nap. And Hurst remarked, "We lay on the graves, among the neatly trimmed graves, and some with no irreverence rested their heads on the green hillocks for pillows and slept without a superstitious dream, but with the assurance that tomorrow's sun would bring earnest and bloody work," which it did, very soon.
Good way to put it. Yeah.
As it turns out. Yeah. So getting into the battle proper then.
Yes.
Smith's Brigade, after being roused from its slumber in the Evergreen Cemetery, and this is around 3:30 in the morning on the 2nd, they'll be posted to what will end up being their final main battle position. And that's in the Taneytown Road. As you may have seen from the photograph that was shown earlier, the Taneytown Road had a stone wall on either side of it. So it would have given you a bit of cover and concealment. And the 73rd Ohio will form the center of the brigade line entirely in the Taneytown Road. To their left, the 136th New York will deploy also in the Taneytown Road. And both those regiments' monuments are along that stretch of road today. The 55th Ohio forms the right of the brigade, and they're kind of bending around the intersection of Taneytown, today's Steinver Avenue, and Washington Street, South Washington Street. That intersection where Tommy's Pizza is about where the 55th Ohio line bends around to, and really seems to culminate about at the Pierce House, the Dobbin House.
Okay.
The 33rd Massachusetts I have not mentioned because on the morning, early in the morning on the 2nd, that regiment is detached for duty on the other side of Cemetery Hill, on the east side of Cemetery Hill. They are ordered to report to General Ames, now commanding General Barlow's division, Barlow having been wounded and captured. And as a consequence, they will not be operating under Smith's command until the 4th of July when they return to the brigade. So what we're looking at from here on out now, contesting this area I call Smith's Ridge, is the 3 regiments of Smith's Brigade, the 2 Ohio and 1 New York regiment.
Okay.
And that's a total strength of around 1,100 officers and men.
All right. Now,
go ahead, please.
Well, so, okay. No, actually, I don't want to jump ahead, so go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
As would have been standard practice of the day, when Smith's regiments take their position in the Taneytown Road, they would have pushed forward a line of skirmishers, essentially an early warning system, a buffer. And we don't know exactly how far out that skirmish line was initially. It may have been somewhere along what is today Johns Avenue.
Okay,
somewhere around there maybe. But what matters in this is prior to dawn, Confederate troops had occupied a position along this so-called Smith's Ridge. And let me add, for anybody looking at a Google map or a Gettysburg Street map, the summit, the crest of Smith's Ridge, essentially runs where you will see modern Fairview Avenue and Highland Avenue. Those two pretty well delineate the rough crest of the ridge, okay? So moving up onto today's Fairview Avenue, or the crest, South Carolina sharpshooters, men belonging to Perrin's brigade, had taken position there, again in the darkness. They begin a harassing fire against Union forces on West Cemetery Hill as soon as it's light enough to do it. Now, infantry, Smith's infantry, position in the road with some cover from stone walls might have not been hit too hard, but the Union artillery in position behind them on the hill does get hit pretty hard.
Okay.
And, artillerymen and artillery horses are so much more vulnerable than infantry. You can't do your job as a cannoneer if you're hiding behind a tree stump,
Right. You got to be out there.
You're upright, you're erect, you're getting shot at. So, so this harassment begins pretty early on. And it might be worth just briefly mentioning a little more about who these Confederates are.
Yeah.
So, the initial opponent for Smith's Brigade will be a provisional sharpshooter battalion belonging to Perrin's South Carolina Brigade. And it's a provisional battalion because it only comes into existence on the eve of battle. The men who belong to it are men selected for their abilities, not only with marksmanship, I mean, that's part of the thing.
Sure.
But also men who are young, athletic, smart, self-confident, guys who can operate in tiny fire teams or individually without having to have an officer looking down their shoulder the whole time.
Okay.
So sort of the cream of your regiments
right.
In a lot of ways. And depending on which account you choose to use, this sharpshooter battalion had either been formed in late January of 1863 or in June 63, right before the invasion of Pennsylvania, and it is not altogether clear. Unfortunately,
Quite a gap.
It is a huge gap.
Why is it such a gap? Like, why do some people say January and others say June?
So there's really a couple of accounts I've used for that. The brigade history for Perrin's brigade, or the Greg McGowan brigade, as it was known for most of the war, briefly mentions the formation. I think they say in June. Now, that is written by a veteran of the brigade like a year or two after the war, so it's pretty contemporary.
Pretty fresh.
The best secondary work on the Army of Northern Virginia sharpshooters, which was written by a gentleman named Fred Ray, which is very well researched, but he is not altogether clear on this.
Okay.
At least my reading of him is maybe it's January, maybe it's June. I'd love to have a little more clarity on that. But I will also jump ahead a little bit and say that by the spring of 1864, the Army of Northern Virginia has become far more serious about these sharpshooter battalions. They're much more professionally trained in their specific art. They get instruction in things like estimating distances, which is hugely important if you're going to do skirmishing and sharpshooting.
Of course, yeah.
But that's all a little bit in the future. Right now, it's a force that has decent training in skirmish tactics that is made up of, again, the cream of the brigade, but hasn't quite gone through all of the in-depth training they're going to get several months later.
So is that a response to like Berdan's sharpshooters, or did the Confederate Army not employ sharpshooters in a serious manner from the beginning, or?
Well, I mean, there were some Confederate units from the beginning that called themselves sharpshooters that were not necessarily sharpshooters.
Right.
As you see the war go on, though, you do get more of these units. My understanding is in the Army of Northern Virginia, and I'm probably stretching this a little because I'm not the world's best expert on Army of Northern Virginia sharpshooter battalions.
Fair enough.
But it seems like the origin of this was in Robert Rhodes' division when it was still D.H. Hill's division. Robert Rhodes, being a brigade commander in that division, was a huge advocate of forming these specialized skirmishing units.
Okay.
And he begins it in his brigade, which will be O'Neill's Alabama Brigade at this battle.
Okay.
And that quickly spreads into the other brigades of that division. And once D.H. Hill goes away and the division eventually goes to Rhodes full-time, he makes sure that all of his brigades have formed these provisional battalions.
The name is escaping me now, and it's annoying me, so I have to ask you just so that I can move on in my head. The sharpshooters that I think are with O'Neill, down, near the McLean farm and everything, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Blackford's battalion.
Blackford, that's it. Yes, thank you. Okay.
Blackford had been put in charge by Rhodes back on the brigade level. You're going to be the guy who's going to form this new sharpshooter battalion, and it starts with them, spreads to the whole division.
Okay.
By Gettysburg, it has also spread to some other divisions. Certainly, Perrin's brigade, part of Hill's, or formerly Hill's, now Pender's Light Division. I believe all of their brigades have sharpshooter battalions by Gettysburg.
But that's interesting because you don't really hear a lot. I mean,
no.
Probably the most famous one would be Blackford. But you think that's the only one or at least my impression was that it was the only one in the Army. But it sounds like it's a pretty widespread thing by Gettysburg.
It's beginning to be.
When it comes to sharpshooters, though, it's Berdan's. That's the story that we all know about sharpshooters in the battle. But even the Union Army had more than just the 1st and 2nd U.S.
They do, but it is very few. In fact, I think once on a very bored winter day, I think I added up the number of Army of the Potomac men who would have been assigned to units considered to be sharpshooters. And I think it's like 630 or something out of a 90,000 man army, or out of 72,000 infantry.
Versus how many on the Confederate side?
Well, because I don't know every single brigade's status on forming these provisional battalions. Some brigades had them, some didn't. Like there'd been an effort to form one in the Texas Brigade sometime back in the spring, and for whatever reason, it didn't materialize.
Okay.
So I really don't know offhand.
Would you say that the unit to unit, not man to man, but unit to unit, the Confederates had more sharpshooter units?
I think that's probable.
Okay.
Most of these provisional units we do know about appear to have numbered between about 100 and 130 men apiece. Well, if there's 5 of them in Rhodes' division, then right there, that's similar to the number in the entire Union Army's sharpshooter corps.
Right. Okay.
That's not counting sharpshooters in the light division or other units. Wofford's brigade in McLaw's division has the 3rd Georgia sharpshooters.
Okay.
So I think it's probably more.
It's probably more. Yeah. But we don't know for sure. But we're saying probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Back to the story.
So these are the opponents that Smith first has to deal with. The sharpshooter battalion from Perrin's brigade is commanded by a young go-getter. He is Captain William T. Haskell. And he is definitely one of the golden boys of that brigade, no question. If you read the brigade history, it's been reprinted a few times. He pops up a lot in just about every battle they fight in 62 and early 63. Okay. It's Haskell distinguished himself. It's Haskell saved the day. Haskell was in the right place at exactly the right time. So again, a young, smart, energetic guy who would seem to be ideal to command a unit like this. He, however, will be killed in action on Smith's Ridge on July 2nd. Mm-hmm. He'll be shot twice and killed. So the problem with being a sharpshooter is, people shoot back.
Yeah. So that's the first people that they're dealing with, and then then it starts. Then what does that do? Cause Smith to send out sharpshooters to counter them?
Yeah. He, somewhere around 9 o'clock in the morning, and as usual, take these times with a few grains of salt. They're approximate.
Right. Around
9 in the morning, by which time apparently Haskell's sharpshooters had caused enough annoyance and damage that something had to be done about these guys. Yeah. So Smith will send 2 companies from each of his 3 regiments out to clear out this nest of vipers. And the attack doesn't go particularly well. I am still sorting through this. We have the big problem that 2 of Smith's regiments do not have existing battle reports.
Okay.
They're just gone. They never made it into the ORs. Huh. I've searched a couple of archives hoping. I'm going to be tackling a few more, but as of right now, all I have are a few lines from the 73rd's report that's got some really sexy sounding stuff in there. And I really hope I can find the rest of the reports someday.
But how is it you only have a few lines, but they
because they are quoted by, he's a captain here, later a major in the 73rd. He's Higgins. And Higgins, after the war, was the man who leads the 73rd Ohio's companies in this morning counterattack.
Okay.
And he apparently takes a fair amount of criticism during the battle, after the battle, and after the war, because this is going to result in really high casualties, as we'll see in a minute.
Okay.
Well, this is a letter he writes in his local newspaper around 1870, defending his reputation and quoting a few lines of the report. Which
it existed.
It existed.
We just lost it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But it existed, but never made it into the official records either.
Right.
That's interesting.
Including the supplement volume, all that stuff.
Huh.
No. Right now it's, it's still a bit of a mystery. But what appears to have happened is, and again, I'm going to be revisiting this because I'm hoping finally this winter to get serious on the book project on this topic that has been eluding me. But, it's always time, right?
I know, it is.
Yeah, it is. It goes so much faster when you're an old doddering type like me.
And I'm starting to learn that, actually.
It's terrifying.
I'm scared.
It's seriously terrible. You blink and it's 4 days gone.
I know.
So the way the attack appears to have unfolded, there must have been miscommunication between the 2 companies of the 73rd and the 2 companies to their left from the 136th New York, because when the Ohio boys go forward, the New Yorkers fall back.
Okay.
So there's some sort of disconnect that happened there. But Captain Higgins leads companies B and G in this attack to drive the sharpshooters off of Smith's Ridge. they are hit incredibly hard doing this. Now, let's keep in mind, who are the guys they're going up against? The best shots in their brigade.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And the Confederates had thrown up hasty fortifications as well. They tore down sections of the rail fence that ran along Smith's Ridge into rail barricades. Some of the men dug little foxholes, what they called scrapes. So these South Carolina men are in, essentially prepared positions, or at least protective positions, and they know what they're doing with their rifles. Short version of this is Company G that takes part in the attack, Company G, 73rd Ohio, will go in with 36 men and will lose 23 in this attack.
Wow.
Yeah. These are not the kind of casualties you normally associate with skirmish line fighting. Right. You lose a few men here and there, but it's not 2/3 of the company swept away or something.
That makes it even more fascinating to me that we don't really know a lot about this.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because that's dramatic.
Very dramatic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Company B going in alongside Company G suffers very similar losses. I believe they lose 21 or 22 out of 33. I think that's something like that. The bottom line is these two companies are all shot to pieces.
Wow.
And yet they're able to push the Confederates off the crest. But what then happens, and will happen again and again over the next 2 days, is that the Confederates, when they're forced off the crest, they drop back to the position of Long Lane, immediately, a couple hundred yards to the west.
Right.
And much of Long Lane was a sunken road. It had some protective trench-like aspects. And the Confederates fall back to that, where they have their skirmish line reserve. And then they counterattack and push the Yanks back off the crest. And at that point, Companies B and G have so few men left that, the Confederates successfully counterattack and drive them back. But this morning affair on July 2nd, this really bloody morning affair, it is just the beginning, and it's setting the template for what the fight's going to be on that ridge for the next 2 days. One side takes it. The other side takes it back. The other side counterattacks, and on and on and on we go.
Yeah.
I don't know yet, at least, how many times the ridge changed hands on the 2nd and 3rd, but it is several times. It appears that about, again, roughly 6 p.m. on the 2nd, the Confederates have taken firm control of the summit of the ridge, and Smith's skirmish line would have been probably somewhere around Johns Avenue, whatever that is, 100, 125, 150 yards away.
So I'm trying to, because again, there's a neighborhood there. So when you go on these roads, Fairview, Highland Avenue, Sunset, or when you go, when you intersect them on like Queen Street or something, it's hard to really gauge where you're going as far as topography, right? Like, in other words, where you're going up. And now when you get to Fairview and you look out across what's now the Rec Park over to Seminary Ridge, it is pretty obvious that you're on higher ground than what you're looking at, right? You're looking across the valley. But in my mind's eye, at least, when I'm coming the other way and I come up and from the Rec Park and get on Fairview and look towards Steinway Avenue and the Cemetery Hill, it doesn't seem like there's a valley between Fairview and Cemetery Hill. It seems like it's a pretty flat slope until you start going up. Not slope, but pretty flat terrain until you start going up at Cemetery Hill. So my question is, am I right? Number one, and if I am right, as they're vying for this crest, after a while, does whoever gets the crest, it almost seems like if the Confederates have the crest, they have the advantage there.
Absolutely.
Because they're firing straight at or slightly up to Union troops, whereas the Union troops are exposed because they're silhouetted by the sky. They're on the high ground on that crest. And I don't know if the line of sight measures up the way I'm picturing here, but I would imagine that the Confederates comfortably down in Long Lane, that might be within long range of muskets, right? Like the extent of a musket's range. They might be able to fire up at them. So you don't want to be hanging out right there at the crest. So does the crest become a no man's land at any point? And are the skirmishers kind of just shy of the crest on their respective sides.
So my understanding of this, at least so far, is because the South Carolina men had torn down a lot of the fence line along what is today Fairview Avenue, or the crest of the ridge. Those rail barricades become the bone of contention because whoever's behind it is much safer.
So they're trying to fight over that.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. One New Yorker who leaves a really terrific account of this fighting specifically talks about, I ran as fast as I could to reach that rail barricade because I knew that was safety. So that's really what becomes the objective, if you will, for these. But the Confederates, whenever they lose the crest, they fall back that short distance to Long Lane. Got protective ground. You almost certainly have a skirmish line reserve there at all times. And also a very well-placed base to strike back from, to counterattack from. When Union troops are driven off the crest, they're basically looking at about a 300-plus yard retreat over entirely open ground and much more vulnerable, much more difficult to find a staging area for a counterattack that's close up to the ridge. Now, of course, when you look at, if you stand, say, at the intersection of Fairview and Queen Street, and you look east towards Cemetery Hill, there's also a whole lot more modern stuff in the way that you're seeing today than there is when you look west across Rec Park.
And the ground could have been graded differently, right?
Sure it was.
Yeah, leveled out.
Yeah.
How about artillery? Is artillery, like when, say, the Confederates have the ridge, is Union artillery targeting them, or is that a waste of ammunition?
I think it's a waste of ammunition.
Okay.
I haven't come up with much in the way of, actually from the men on both sides, of artillery being much of a factor in this ongoing skirmish.
Yeah.
Where you do see mention of artillery fire by Orland Smith's men is when the main body of the brigade is in its main position in the Taneytown Road. Because you're typically feeding 2 or 3 companies of each regiment onto the skirmish line, and everybody else is back on that main line. Well, in the Taneytown Road, they take a fair amount of Confederate shell fire, and they also take some Federal shell fire. They complain about overshoots from Confederate artillery bombarding the Culp's Hill area, coming in on behind them. They also complain about Union shells bursting prematurely, or sabots landing on them. It must have really felt like there's just nowhere safe to be. Because the other problem that Smith's men have, and particularly the 73rd Ohio, is when they are in position in the Taneytown Road, their right flank is pointing right down Washington Street. And since the Confederates have possession of most of Washington Street, including the buildings like the Stock House and the Wasatski-Barbihan House.
Right.
Confederate fire coming from the town, enfilading fire, is going to wreak real havoc on the right of Smith's brigade.
Now, the 55th Ohio, they're still there.
They're still the right.
Okay. So they're still the right.
But their losses are less than the 73rd considerably.
Sure.
Which seems to suggest that their position has a bit more cover and concealment. Again, that intersection area has changed so radically now, there's not much you can do with it. But they do not take anything like the casualties the 73rd does. The 73rd's right is just wide open on the road. I would invite you to stand. I'd invite you to stand about where the Stock House is today, and look down the Taneytown Road, looking southward. If there's no cars around, you might want to stand in the road, but no, you know what? I don't recommend that. Let's not stand in the road. But if you look straight down Washington to Taneytown, you're going to see you're looking right into the right flank of the 73rd Ohio. And the Confederates punished that regiment severely with sharpshooter fire.
Yeah. Huh.
Now, for anyone who measures these distances, like the distance from the crest of Smith's Ridge to the main Union line at West Cemetery Hill, it's about 350 yards, more or less. If you measure the distance from a Confederate firing from the Stock House, firing into the right of the 73rd Ohio, that's like 400, I think. Now, these are basically double the distance that most infantry fights are taking place, right? It's a rare infantry firefight that happens at 300 whatever yards. But in this case, we are talking about, particularly on the Confederate side, people selected for their ability.
Right.
So
it's not a skirmish line. These are sharpshooters.
Yeah, these are pros. Yeah. So a 400-yard shot for one of them is very different than a 400-yard shot from just some guy.
Yeah.
And happily, Smith's brigade is well armed for this type of game. All of the regiments in the brigade are armed with pattern 1853 Enfield rifle muskets, arguably the most accurate muzzle loader in use in the Army of the Potomac at that point. So they are well configured for this particular action.
So I'm no expert on firearms, although I do enjoy shooting them. But when you're in a situation where you're shooting at distance, like these sharpshooters you're talking about, and they've got that 400-yard shot, at what point are you raising that rear sight? You know how you can...
Yeah, it's a ladder sight. Yeah.
That's it. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, let's see. It's been a while since I've had an Enfield in my hand. You're going to adjust, nobody's going to see this, I guess, but you can adjust the ladder slightly upward at an angle, and then you get to a number of yards where you have to have it completely vertical.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
I got an Enfield hanging on my wall at home. Doesn't help me now. I'm thinking 400 yards is where that ladder sight's going to be vertical.
Straight up.
And the lower distances, it's just going to be slightly elevated.
But how are you deciding at which point you need to start to elevate it? You know, like, is it every 100 yards?
Yes, it's every 100 yards. 100-yard increments, yeah.
Okay. That's okay. I've always been afraid to ask that. And I said, why not do it in front of everybody?
Yeah.
I'll look stupid in front of everybody watching.
Well, also keep in mind, if you are firing down the line of battle, a compact line of battle, you don't have to necessarily hit the guy you're aiming at.
Right. You just got to get the range.
The guy one row down will do just fine.
Yeah.
So, there is some of that.
And that's got to be frustrating for the men just sitting there taking it.
Incredibly frustrating.
You know, I mean, you
can't hit back.
No.
And of course, for obvious reasons, there is a real reticence in the Army of the Potomac to line up your artillery and shell Gettysburg into oblivion.
Right.
Like you might do in some Tennessee town. Okay, fine. But this is Pennsylvania, and it's full of, good, loyal folk. There are a couple of occasions, though, where Confederate sharpshooting gets so annoying that they do employ artillery. And one notable example of this, the 73rd Ohio's regimental history writes about this, describing Confederate marksmen firing from a brick house, which may well have been the stock house, but that's not 100% certain. But the man described as the general in the regimental history, which might have been Steinwehr, or it might have been Brigade Commander Colonel Smith, maybe. But the regimental history says the general approved for a field gun to be brought down into the Taneytown Road and to shell the Confederates in this house. Okay. And one reason I think it may well have been the stock house is it fits the description, brick house, 2-story. It's certainly close enough for a good shot from an artillery piece. And, we drive by the stock house today and we can see the little pock marks and it's all very, battle damage. Yeah. Well, that's what it looked like after the battle.
Ah, look at this.
So that's like not buck and ball that did that.
No, it is not. And I think that up there at the apex of the roof, you can see that there's different brick there.
Yeah. Right, you can see the repairs if you look really close. Yeah.
Yeah. But wow, look at that.
Yeah. So somebody threw a couple of shells or case shot at that place.
Yeah.
And it could very easily be the episode described by the men in the 73rd. So there are a couple cases where artillery is used. They try to use it surgically. According to the account, it silenced the Confederates for a bit, but before long they were back at it nasty as ever.
Yeah.
So
that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
We're taking your phone calls today. We don't have submitted questions from our patrons. So number 717-420-1978. If you have a question, call in at any time and we'll take your call. All right. So moving along.
So again, this morning counterattack, this very bloody morning counterattack that Smith's men execute. Well, it is the beginning, as I alluded to, of a day-long back and forth sort of fight, which again, by evening, it appears the summit of the ridge is in Confederate hands strongly. The Union skirmish line, Smith's skirmish line, would have pulled back to 150, maybe 200 yards east of there. Again, somewhere around Johns Avenue, more or less, that current neighborhood. The nighttime pretty much puts a halt to the fighting, although it is during nighttime that the famous episode of the rescue of the wounded Private George Nixon. You mentioned Nixon earlier.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Member of Company B of the 73rd, very possibly suffers his wound in that costly morning counterattack that goes awry.
So he's possibly laying out there for hours.
Probably for more or less 12 hours or more.
And what is his wound?
Oh, gosh.
Isn't it the hip?
It's a torso, somewhere in the torso area. I don't remember if it's pelvis or...
Well, keep talking. I'll look it up.
It's not good. Let's put it that way. It's not a, it's not a flesh wound. Okay. For sure. But yeah, one of the things that you get from reading the accounts of the men who fought on this ridge, Union or Confederate, they all talk about hearing the cries of hundreds of wounded men, both in the area and specifically between the lines, because there's a no man's land with scores of wounded and dying men in it. And one man who cannot bear to hear these cries anymore is a musician, a drummer in Company B, 73rd Ohio, Richard Enderlin. Enderlin was a friend of Nixon, knew Nixon had been wounded out there in no man's land, and he goes to his captain, Higgins, and asks permission to go out and rescue his friend. And Higgins, I think quite reasonably, says, no way in hell. I mean, I'm just going to lose another guy, right? This is, and by the way, how are you going to find him among all the other dying guys out there?
Screaming guys.
Well, what is not clear to me is whether Enderlin wears Higgins down and gets an okay, or whether Enderlin just says, goes. I'm going anyway. Yeah. But whatever it is, he strips off all his gear. He crawls out in front of the Union skirmish line, somehow locates his badly wounded friend among all these other bodies, and somehow doesn't get captured or shot by the enemy, and slowly drags him back to Federal lines, where he's then thrown in an ambulance. But again, there's no happy ending here.
Right.
He dies of those wounds a few days later, leaving a wife and I believe it is 9 children, I think, in Vinton County, Ohio. Yeah.
I think I found the answer. It is the hip. George received a serious wound to his hip and would lie in the field for hours, crying out in pain until night set in. Eventually, young drummer, blah, 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 blah. That's actually on the Gettysburg Battlefield Tours website.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm assuming they checked with some guides before doing that, or at least the Park Service. But yeah, that sounds familiar to me, the hip. And the hip has got to be one of the worst places, the most painful places to get hit. You ever like sit up and your hip's out of whack from sitting too long and you can't walk for a good while, or, it's painful. It hurts.
It is.
Bullet going through it.
I think if you're going to put together, though, a list of like wounds not to have.
Yeah.
One of my ancestors who gets hit in the 73rd's morning counterattack, bullet crashed through his jaw, exited his eye, and he lived for 6 days with that.
Jesus. Did he keep his jaw or did it take it off?
It's not clear. It wrecked it, whatever.
Yeah.
He certainly would not have been able to intake any nourishment, any water. There's no surgical fix for a blown off face in the Civil War. It's just, how soon are you going to die?
Yeah, and I agree with you. Of all the wounds I've read about, and it never occurred to me that this could happen, but why couldn't it? Until I read about, it was actually, it was the first time I read about a jaw was an account from here. I think down at the Peach Orchard, and I want to say it was Alexander who wrote it. And I keep referring to this, and I never actually find out who wrote it. But he sees a guy laying against the fence, and he assumes he's dead. And then he sees a motion, and he looks over again, and he notices the guy's missing his entire lower jaw.
Yeah.
And that creeped me out so bad. Another one was from Chancellorsville. It wasn't a jaw, But there's a unit was charging a battery. The battery was all Napoleons, and it opened up with double canister. And there were like 5 guys standing when the dust cleared. The guy writing this was one of them. And he looked over a few yards and he saw one of the younger lads in the company that he knew standing there. And he went over to him because he noticed that his shoulder had been completely ripped off, and he could as he got closer, he could see his heart beating. And the kid was still standing. And he touched him on the shoulder to kind of help him down. And then as soon as that kind of snapped him out of his shock, and he just collapsed and died. Just a horror movie.
Yeah.
You know? And I always say this, and it's probably annoying for the listeners, but it's why the hell do we go through these human beings? We go through these wars. Yeah, we write about them. We tell people about them. And the next generation says, sounds like a good idea. Let's do it again.
Sure.
We never learn.
40 years of studying human conflict has led me to the conclusion we are not a very progressive species.
No, we're very stupid.
Yeah, that would be another way of putting it. Yeah, a little gentler way of putting it.
We have to learn the hard way. You know what I mean?
Again and again.
Yeah, every generation has to learn the hard way. I remember when I was a little kid, remember the electric stoves where they still make them, where they're coiled? Yeah. So we had those as a little kid, and I remember my mom sat me on the counter next to it, and she cooked something up, and she turned it off, and she said, "Don't touch that." And I said, "Okay." But then the red went away, and it was black.
Right.
And I go, "Oh, well, that must be okay." And scream bloody murder. And I told you not to touch that, but I'll tell you this, I'll never touch a electric stove again. Yeah. But sometimes we just can't take people's word for it.
No.
And we just got to know ourselves.
No, there is no romance. There is no adventure in any of this stuff.
No.
It's just relentless horror, period.
Yeah. Relentless horror. I like that. All right. So Nixon is retrieved. He's sent away.
Yeah.
And where are we now? So it's nighttime still.
It's nighttime. And again, beyond that episode that we can document with Enderlin and Nixon, there may well have been a few other episodes of courageous or ill-advised people going out between the lines to look for a comrade, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of that going on. It seems much more to have been a night of lots of really nervous young men with fingers on the triggers, and you would have definitely put your life at risk if you ventured out to look for a wounded comrade or whatever.
Yeah.
It'd probably be a pretty quick end for you. But that all resumes. First light on July 3rd, and it's the same template as the day before. Union troops push to recapture the ridge crest. Confederates push back. What only brings that to a halt is the beginning of the cannonade, the bombardment prior to Pickett's charge. Or if we want to be all-inclusive, it's the Pickett, Pettigrew, Trimble, Wilcox charge.
We're adding Wilcox now?
I think we should.
Oh, jeez.
Look, if you're going to add 3, Wilcox needs a little love.
Well, why don't we just name everybody who took part in it?
Well, we could. We'll be here a while. But I've always thought, well, if we're going to name all these guys, Wilcox at least should get an honorable mention.
I agree.
He gets a dreadful mission, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the big cannonade begins roughly 1 p.m., and universally every account from a Confederate or a Yank out here is we all hug the earth, try to make ourselves as small as possible, and let all that iron pass overhead.
Yeah.
As soon as the bombardment is over, everybody's up and back at it. And Smith, in his battle report, thought his impression when the Pickett, et cetera, charge began was that it was headed directly for his position. That was his take on it, is they're coming right for my brigade.
Right.
And he was, I forget the word he uses, it's understatement, but he was relieved to find out, no, that was not the trajectory of the enemy attack. It was going to strike a little farther south of there, which was fine with him. Well, that continued skirmishing occurs right up until nightfall on the 3rd. And then in the morning of the 4th, and with, of course, the failure of that final Confederate attack, Lee is, over the evening of the 3rd, beginning to contract his positions, preparatory to retreating. And there is yet more skirmishing that occurs beyond Smith's Ridge. The Confederates will have pulled off of the ridge by sometime in the morning.
Okay.
Conceded it to Union troops. But they continue to maintain a skirmish line partway between Seminary Ridge and Smith's Ridge. So there is a Confederate presence screening the Confederate front line, as you'd expect, and they are popping away with Smith's men for a good part of the 4th as well. The 33rd Massachusetts, the last regiment of Smith's brigade, that returns to his command that morning, and they go right out on the skirmish line.
So I'm glad you mentioned them because one of our listeners, Ty Webb, sent a question and he said, I know it doesn't fall within Smith's Ridge, but afterwards can Stu briefly discuss the 33rd Mass role in the defense of East Cemetery Hill. So can you give us a little bit of that? So their monument is at the intersection of, what is that, Slocum and Wainwright?
Yeah.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. And it's right there on the corner. It's kind of a odd-shaped thing.
Yeah,
it just says 33. I don't even know what you call that shape. Like kind of a pyramid on top,
sort of, but not sawn off like, and not exactly triangular. I don't know what that shape is.
It's pretty interesting.
I always failed
geometry.
Yeah.
But it's right there on the corner, and it says 33 on it, and that's part of Smith's Brigade. But they're on the opposite side of the hill. Mm-hmm. So why are they there, and what do they do?
So first off, they are detached from Smith pre-dawn or right around dawn on the 2nd. And their main role is to beef up the troops, the infantry holding East Cemetery Hill, because the infantry force holding the east side of the hill is incredibly thin. We're talking about the remnants of what had been Francis Barlow's division.
Yeah.
Barlow's wounded and captured, so now it's Ames' division, and it is incredibly thin. It had been the smallest division in the Army before the battle, with barely 2,400 men.
Yeah.
By the time they are run through the sausage machine on the afternoon of July 1st, I think they're probably between 1,300 and 1,400 men. That's what's in the ranks.
Mm-hmm.
And they're covering a front that you really need to have about 2,500 men to cover adequately. So the 33rd Mass is brought in to pick up some of that slack. And they're a nice big regiment. Again, they've not seen any big battles until Gettysburg, so they're coming into this fight with just shy of 500 men.
Yeah.
It is a significant bulk up for Ames, and that's where they will be when the Confederates launch their dusk attack against East Cemetery Hill. They play a pretty powerful role in that. They also probably have the easiest mission of any of the Union regiments defending the east side of the hill, because the area that they're in, and they're coming up against the 57th North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
The 57th has to traverse some really difficult ground to get at them. They're doing it the whole way under point-blank Napoleon fire from Stevens Knoll. And I mean, that is rock-throwing distance, basically.
Yeah.
So the 57th North Carolina is getting shattered in their flank. Then they've got the immovable object of the 33rd Massachusetts behind a nice high stone wall that is hitting them from the front. So it's a relatively easy repulse compared to some of the other units that do get penetrated in the Confederate assault. But the 33rd does not. They turn in a very solid performance. Again, for battle rookies, it's a nice, easy mission to build your confidence on, I think.
Sure.
But I don't want to suggest this is a bloodless success. They lose over 40 casualties at Gettysburg, which is not nothing.
Right.
Those are 40 lives ruined.
Yeah.
So it's not nothing.
And, you're talking about the North Carolinians taking the artillery in the flank there. When you go and stand on Stevens Knoll or any part of that treeless part of that saddle between Culp's Hill and Stevens Knoll, like that whole area there where the Iron Brigade's position starts and all that. And you look out into that gulch. Is that even a gulch? I don't know. It looks like a gulch to me because it sounds ugly.
Yeah,
ravine. Yeah. But you imagine, being the Confederates coming across that wide open field, and then turning their flank to hit the hill. And there's Stevens Battery.
Yeah.
I mean, geez, you got to have balls of steel doing that, man. I can't imagine how these guys did this. I think it helps to be 19 years old.
there is a certain invincibility that comes, or maybe stupidity that comes with youth. I'm personally amazed I made it past 21 with all my fingers and toes.
Oh, yeah.
It's slightly a miracle. So, I think that does help. I think if you'd had if the 57th North Carolina had been made up of 44-year-old family men, that attack may not have gone quite so.
We would have killed our colonel.
Yeah.
You're trying to tell us to go there.
Frag the colonel and run for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So, that's the 33rd there for you, Ty. So why don't we do this? We'll take our commercial break now, get that in real quick, and then we'll wrap it up, okay?
Sounds good.
All right, so we'll be right back after these words. Hey, everybody, I just want you to know that you might not realize this, but Stu is not just a Gettysburg licensed battlefield guide, but he also has his own battlefield tour company. It's called Battleground Historical Tours. Stu, tell us a little bit about it. What do you do? Where do you go?
So I do a few other battlefields in North America, American Civil War and American Revolution. For example, Brandywine, 1777. I've done tours of the Lake Champlain Valley, 1776-77. And also some battlefields like Manassas, First and Second Battles, Richmond, the 7 Days, Monocacy. But mainly I do a lot of World War I and World War II tours in Europe. For example, in 2025, in the spring, I have a 9-day tour of First World War battlefields in Belgium and France. In the fall of 25, I have a Battle of the Bulge tour. And then in 26, I'll be offering a tour of Poland, focusing on the Holocaust and the Second World War.
Wow.
And also I'll be doing another Normandy tour in 2026 as well. So I'll be on a number of battlefields here and abroad.
That's awesome. I know if you want to do this out in the audience there, you go to www.battlegroundhistorytours.com. Sign up for one of these tours. These sound actually really interesting.
I try.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. I hope that works for you. Well, it is working for you, but I hope it continues to. Yeah. And I hope you guys will go ahead and show Stu your smiling face on his tour. Once again, that's www.battlegroundhistorytours.com. The Gettysburg Museum of History, located right here in the center of Gettysburg, PA. Owner and curator Eric Dorr grew up here and has spent his life collecting and preserving history through artifacts ranging from the Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg, World War II, presidential items, pop culture, and more. His museum is free and open to visitors Wednesday through Sunday, 11 to 5 p.m., where you can stop by and immerse yourself in some of the most amazing artifacts that you would never believe exist in the middle of Gettysburg. If you're a fan of Band of Brothers and Everything Easy Company, you'll love his exhibit featuring the Dick Winters collection and artifacts from D-Day. You can even own your own piece of history by buying one of the many relics they have for sale in the museum and on the website gettysburgmuseumofhistory.com. The Gettysburg Museum of History is a non-profit 501c3 organization with a foundation that allows all purchases and donations to keep the museum operating and open free of charge. They have been featured on the History Channel, the Travel Channel, the Smithsonian Channel, and the Science Channel. Now you can check them out on American Artifact, the series on the YouTube channel, The History Underground. So that's the Gettysburg Museum of History at 219 Baltimore Street or the gettysburgmuseumofhistory.com.
When you're dragging ass out of bed and the hair's mussed up on your head, you picture the 20th Maine, and you're happy once again. Fight the battle against being slow with little ground top, bro.
When you're dragging ass out of bed, the hair's mussed up on your head. You picture the 20th Maine, and you're happy once again. Fight the battle against being slow with Little Ground Top Bro.
Addressing Gettysburg's Little Ground Top by Bantam Roasters is available at 82 Steinware Avenue in Gettysburg or at addressinggettysburg.com/cafe.
You're listening to the Addressing Gettysburg podcast with Matt Callery.
All right, and we're back now. And again, we don't have any questions from our patrons because this is such an obscure topic. But hopefully we've learned a lot more about it this time. And we want to thank Stu for helping us learn that. Stu, wrap up the story of Smith's Brigade for us, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I will quickly mention, because this very much ties into the neighborhood we've been fighting this clash in. In the realm of the what if, I think one of the great what ifs of the battle is the failure of Rhodes' division to launch its attack on West Cemetery Hill on the evening of July 2nd.
I'm glad you brought that up, yeah.
It's, I don't really do what if stuff a whole lot because, I mean, there's no destination on that road ultimately. But it is hard for me to imagine that if Rhodes had conducted the full-bore attack expected of him at the same time that Early is striking the east side of Cemetery Hill, and given the rather paltry numbers the 11th Corps had available in terms of infantry up there, it's very difficult for me to see how that attack does anything other than succeed.
Yeah.
And so I think perhaps the future of the Republic owes Robert Rhodes a thank you maybe for that. But that attack would have come right through Smith's brigade if it had taken place. It would have come right through their skirmish line and then through their main battle line on Taneytown Road if it had occurred. Now, a member of the 55th Ohio later wrote that he thought the reason Rhodes didn't attack was he was so intimidated by the skirmish line of the 55th Ohio that he just said, no, we're not dangling with those guys, which I do admit is probably not entirely accurate.
But something had to make Rhodes say no.
Well, to me, this is nothing more than my personal take on it, but I mean, Rhodes kind of fumbles the ball a bit on July 1st. I do think he's a little gun shy and not wanting to screw up again on the 2nd.
Okay.
That's my take on it. He certainly takes his time getting his people into position. When he does get them into position, he doesn't want to give the order to attack. He sends Stephen Ramseur up to, hey, go take a look and see if we can attack that position. And Ramseur comes back and says it doesn't look good. And Rhodes is like, oh, okay, that's exactly what I wanted to hear. Thank you. No attacks happening. So, yeah, I think Rhodes is honestly a little gun shy from his fumbles.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I do think it's arguably the greatest Confederate opportunity to win the battle right there that never happens. But again, I mention that only because that would have very much involved Orland Smith's folks in a really major way. So by the close of the battle, Smith's men had been heavily engaged for 2 days. In the case of the 33rd Massachusetts, 1 day, but the other two regiments heavily engaged on 2 days. And they'd sustained some pretty significant losses in the process. The heaviest losses by far fell on the 73rd Ohio, who had the sort of a convergence of bad luck. The morning attack by companies B and G that gets shot entirely to pieces. A third of the regiment's losses come from those two companies. So plus you get firing coming from the town, from the buildings on the southern edge of town into their flank. So it gets hit hardest. The regiment took 338 men into battle and loses 134. It's about 40% casualties. And that is actually a considerably higher percentage than units like 69th Pennsylvania, 20th Maine, prominent regiments at the battle that see some real battle line fighting. Their losses exceed that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what's interesting about Smith's Brigade in general is really, it's like all and not to minimize it, but all they're doing is skirmishing.
Yes.
They're not in any major...
No, there's no big attack. There's no big defense. Skirmishing is normally a somewhat low intensity kind of thing that you're not piling up the bodies doing that typically. Although more than one man who fights across Smith Ridge will say it, and this includes Abner Perrin commanding the South Carolinians, the heaviest skirmishing I have ever witnessed is what Perrin called it. And he'd seen a few fights. And you get similar comments from other men. Just the intensity, the continuous nature of it was unfamiliar to these guys, not something they'd participated in before. The relative rookies of the 136th New York lose over 110 of their men. The 33rd Mass, again, they're fighting a different battle for the most part, but again, 44 casualties out of that regiment, another 49 from the 55th Ohio. It all comes out to 337 men are hit. And that's about a 20% loss total for the brigade, including just under 100 fatal casualties. But Again, most of those losses fall on the 73rd and 136th out there on the skirmish line, hour after hour after hour.
So, I mean, so what is it? 1,600 or so men. They lose 300 and, what'd you say, 40?
337.
37. So about 1,200 men left. I mean, that, and it's skirmishing. It's just skirmishing. It's not a major brawl.
This is not close quarters battle line firefights. No.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You mentioned before we started the show the 8th Ohio's monument.
Yeah.
And how it's not placed as well as it should be, or where it should be.
Yes.
Okay. Where should it be?
So I mentioned the 8th Ohio to you mainly because that regiment and also detachments from the 4th Ohio in their same brigade will also be contesting this same ground, this same quote-unquote Smith's Ridge area. They're going to be on the very left of Smith's brigade.
Okay.
So where the 136th New York ends is where the 4th and the 8th Ohio's skirmish lines are going to begin. Now,
They're Carroll's brigade?
they are Carroll's brigade, 2nd Corps. And I don't know how much you want me to get into depth-wise here.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So first off, Carroll's brigade begins July 2nd in the Ziegler's Grove area on the north end of Cemetery Ridge in the sort of the neighborhood of the Bryan Farm buildings. And that morning, 4 companies of the 4th Ohio, commanded by Major Gordon Stewart, are going to be ordered to advance across the Emmetsburg Road and establish a skirmish line to use some modern landmarks, basically a little bit behind the McDonald's and the Friendlies.
Okay.
Area. Yeah, I know. So, yeah.
Let me move my Google map to McDonald's.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So behind those facilities a ways would have been where 4th Ohio establishes its 4-company skirmish line.
Got it.
And they do take part in some, I will call it low-intensity skirmishing with Confederates throughout the morning. They're pulled off of that position a little later as the skirmishing had kind of died down. And I guess Carroll's decision was, we don't really need 4 companies out there on the skirmish line. We can replace them with 2, and we'll give the boys more rest, right? So Major Stewart's 4 companies come in. 2 companies go out under the command of Captain Peter Grubb. And this is sometime early afternoon. And later in the afternoon, the Confederates crank up their skirmish line activities dramatically. They really increase the aggression on that. This is probably in support of the attacks Longstreet is now delivering further to the south. And the Confederates pressure these 2 companies of the 4th Ohio sufficiently that they virtually overrun them. I mean, they're in real danger of being encircled. These are 49 men in these 2 companies. They lose 24. Both the officers are killed. They end up under command of a wounded sergeant who refuses to retreat. Martin Longworth, Sergeant Longworth, will not give ground to rebels. And so all of this is being seen from a few hundred yards away on Cemetery Ridge by Colonel Carroll. So he's going to see this little detachment about to be gobbled up and annihilated. So he will order the 8th Ohio to charge down from Cemetery Ridge,
Right.
push the Confederates back, and relieve Captain Grubb's detachment, which they do. And then they're ordered to stay out there in that forward outpost. The main body of the 8th Ohio will take position in a sunken stretch of the Emmetsburg Road or Steinwer Avenue today that would have been just about in front of today's McDonald's Friendlies, right in that immediate neighborhood. There was a stretch, maybe, 100, 150 yards long, where a small regiment like the 8th could drop in there and have real cover. And at least some of the Ohioans tore down fence rails that lined the road, piled them up on the west side as a barricade. All of a sudden, you're standing in probably 3-4 feet of cover. So it's a good position. The colonel of the 8th, Lieutenant Colonel Franklin Sawyer, will rotate 2 or 3 companies at a time out on the skirmish line beyond that sunken part of the Emmetsburg Road, where they're going to tie in to Orland Smith's skirmishers to their right or north.
Okay.
And that approximate area where the 8th Ohio's skirmish line or outpost line would have been along about the intersection of King Street and Highland Avenue.
King and Highland,
roughly.
Okay, there we go.
And they are facing Confederates down in Long Lane, a couple hundred yards to the west.
I see. Okay. Yes.
Now, when Pickett's charge occurs, and we're definitely not going to have an opportunity to get into all that.
Right.
But when Pickett's charge occurs and the 8th Ohio conducts its impromptu flank attack into Pettigrew's and Trimble's flanks, well, they will have pivoted position. They will have gone to from a western-facing position to a southward-facing position, and they move into the area about, again, more wonderful landmarks, behind the soon-to-be-eradicated battle theater, behind the KFC. That's the area where they're firing into the flank of the attacking Confederate divisions. So the monument neither reflects where they engaged Pickett's charge or where their main regimental position was.
Okay.
To place that monument correctly, you need to move it about 250 to 300 yards north and place it right about where King Street and Steinver Avenue intersect, right by the McDonald's, and there you've got the main position of the regiment.
Okay.
And more than one veteran of the 8th in the 1880s and 90s attempted to get the monument moved, and for one reason or another, it just never happened.
All right, we actually have a call here. Ron Moore is on the air. Ron, are you there?
Yeah, Matt, I'm here.
Welcome, sir. And how are you enjoying the Best Western?
Actually, I'm such a geek. I'm sitting here with the Lano maps going page by page as you guys described.
That's good. That's what we want you to do.
Yeah, that's the way to do it.
Yeah.
My question was, where was Rhodes' division deployed preemptively before he was supposed to attack West Cemetery Hill? And what time was he sent out there? How long were they there?
Okay. Prior to moving into what would have been their attack positions, the bulk of Rhodes' division, as I recall, was essentially in West Middle Street, today's Pennsylvania 116, or the Fairfield Road. Like every other road around here, it has multiple names. So 116 West Middle or Fairfield Road. Or Hagerstown Road, right? Yeah, okay, 4. So whichever one you like. If I'm remembering correctly, 3 of his brigades were positioned in that street, and 2 more were north of there, closer to Chambersburg Pike. Drawing a little bit of a blank on those 2 brigades and back, but the 3 up front were definitely in the area of West Middle Street. It's not a long trip to move any of those brigades into an attack position, and that jump-off position would have been about where Gettysburg's Rec Park is today. Okay? So that's not a big trip to move troops, and the town was a much less difficult obstacle than it would have been today. It's fewer roads, more open spaces, less buildings than today. Rhodes is definitely in position there sometime around between 9 and 10 p.m. It's somewhere in there when he's finally in position. I can't be any more specific on the time of day, though, than that.
Okay, and is that another one of those things where he was given some kind of discretion? I just wonder why, whose decision was it for him not to attack?
Good question.
Yeah, it is a good question. My understanding, and someone else may have a little better info on this than I do. My understanding is that the attack orders are somewhat discretionary. They come from Corps Commander Ewell. And the other problem Rhodes is having is that he expected support on his right for the attack. The troops to his right would have been Pender's division, or by that night, Lane's division, because Pender's already been badly wounded, soon to die of his wounds. Well, Pender's division's 3rd Corps, Rhodes' 2nd Corps, so there's not a unity of command thing there. Rhodes is expecting Pender's men would advance on his right while he tackles Cemetery Hill. But there's no such clear indication coming from AP Hill's Corps that they'll actually do that. And so I think there's some reticence on the part of Rhodes about support on that flank. And I cannot remember exactly the wording of Ewell's orders to Rhodes for the attack, nor do I even know if they exist. But there was an element of discretion there, yes. And then he passes the ball to Ramseur, because again, I don't think Rhodes wants to make a key decision on the second. I just don't think he does. So he defers to Ramseur, arguably his best brigade commander. And Ramseur does a little reconnaissance with George Doles, and they come back and say, wow, there's a lot of Yankee artillery up there, man. And Rhodes is like, okay, that's it then. So I don't know if that answered your question as well as I would have liked to, but it's about all I've got. I'll be looking a little deeper when I get home. So yeah.
Ron, did you take the guide exam?
Yes.
Is that why you're in town?
I did. I was actually at your party Saturday
That's
night.
right. I know you were at the party, but I can't remember if you took the exam.
Yeah.
Do you,
I did take the exam.
How do you think you did?
Not well. Not well enough.
I think we all felt that way.
But you never know.
You know, once again, the non-battle stuff threw me.
Yeah. Did it seem to you that there was more of that than battle stuff?
It seemed to me there was more than I expected, and
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's their show and they can run it the way they wish, but I don't know what the heck any of that had to do with guiding.
Well, that seems to be the consensus. I mean, I understand you want a well-rounded guide who has a good understanding of things, but do you think it's important that we know the name of the act?
As well as I do.
Yeah.
Right. Sets the speed limits in the park. I don't think that question's going to come up ever.
Right, exactly.
And I also couldn't remember the name of the George house. So I thought about writing the old-time photo place. And I don't know if I would have got credit or not.
Half credit, maybe.
Yeah, right. I mean, that was the easiest one for me. All of the, because that's easy to remember. George.
Yeah,
he must have been made fun
one.
of a lot as a kid.
Probably.
Yeah.
I walked past it probably 300 times and never knew the real name of it.
Well, I think it's interesting, and like I was saying to Stu, if the highest grade's a 65 and they base the curve off of that, I think I have a fighting chance. But I don't.
Well, hopefully they give it again in a couple years because I'm 65. I want to take it again while I can still walk.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, somebody was telling me that Antietam and Harper's Ferry are much more, I don't want to say reasonable, but they're easier. Not the test per se, but the process is a lot easier. So if you really have a hankering for being a Civil War guide, maybe try those out. You'll be able to get in it faster before you're 70.
I think I want the crown jewel. I don't want to be on the B team. Sorry.
Well, but let me put it to you like this. I wanted to be a big, superstar media mogul, but this is what I'm doing, and I'm happy.
For what it's worth, I know some superb Antietam guides who are every bit as good as anybody we've got here, including me.
Yep. No, we know absolutely. We've got.
I have two of their cards in my pocket right now. I use them several times. I wasn't trying to belittle them. I was just saying that's not something I wanted.
Sure.
Yeah. Well,
so
they're great places too. I might think of doing that. I don't know. It's very hard. Look, here's the thing. Those parks need guides.
Yeah.
The people who want to be guides need Gettysburg. But Gettysburg doesn't really need the amount of guides that who want to be guides, the amount of people who want to be guides. So I think if you have an urge to take people around and show them American history, I don't know why Antietam or Harper's Ferry isn't as sacred as Gettysburg. So, if that's the urge, if that's the itch you need to scratch, then I say let's try. I'll try to do that. It'd be a little easier. The process is different. So, and then you work your way up to Gettysburg. You work your way up, Ron.
Yeah. Well, like I say, though, I can still enjoy my Gettysburg nerddom, that I can sit here and listen to you guys and go page by page in this book. And
there you go. Well, that's all we needed to hear then. Thanks, Ron. And
I just hope the one gentleman that sat next to me is okay, but because he got up about 4 times and like walked around in a circle and then got back in his seat.
Yeah, I felt.
Please let him make it. That's the only thing I can say.
I know there's a lot of people who really put a lot on getting this, and I've seen their Facebook comments prior to and since then. And it's night and day. And I worry. I actually do worry about them because like they're really taking it seriously. I went into it with the attitude of there's no way in hell I'm passing this thing because I don't know what they want me to know. So I'm just going to take it as a fact-finding mission, you know? And I was laughing through the middle of it when I realized that I don't know half of what I should know.
No, I now know a lot of what I don't know,
right,
which will probably help me the next time.
Yeah. All right, Ron, thank you very much for the call. Thanks for listening, and enjoy the rest of your trip here to Gettysburg.
Thank you.
You're
Have
welcome.
a good day.
You too. Bye-bye. All right. Anything else you want to add?
Just as a little bit of closure on Smith's Brigade.
Yes.
So in the aftermath of the Federal victory at Gettysburg and, of course, the retreat of Lee's army back to Virginia, Smith's Brigade will accompany the Army of the Potomac in their pursuit of Lee. And by just after mid-July, they're back down in Northern Virginia. Now, Smith's Brigade and their division in the 11th Corps is not going to be long for the Army of the Potomac after Gettysburg. In September of 63, and this is a consequence of the federal defeat of the Army of the Cumberland, or the defeat of the Federal Army of the Cumberland at Chickamauga, and the retreat of that army to Chattanooga, where they find themselves in danger of becoming under siege. The Lincoln administration is going to detach some strong units from both the Army of the Potomac and the Army of the Tennessee to make their way to Chattanooga and kind of bail out the Army of the Cumberland. And Meade is ordered to send 2 corps. He sends the 11th and the 12th. And at that point, the history of Smith's Brigade becomes the history of the Western Theater. They're going to be, by the beginning of the year, and the 12th and the 11th Corps, both very small corps by the end of 1863, they were combined into the new 20th Corps. The 20th Corps is assigned to the Army of the Cumberland. They will participate in the campaign that ends up taking Atlanta. So they'll be at places like Kennesaw Mountain and Resaca and that sort of thing. After Atlanta, they are part of the March to the Sea, the March to Savannah, and then the brigade makes a left turn, a north turn, and will be moving up through the Carolinas. They end their war in North Carolina. That's where they are when Johnston surrenders his forces in that state. They then go on to take part in the Grand Review of the Armies in that summer. And after that, it's a pretty quick mustering out for the units. Most of the men are back home before the end of 1863. Smith himself was not with his brigade until the very end. In the early part of 64, he resigns his commission. Still a colonel, the same rank he'd gone in at 2.5+ years earlier. Smith does not indicate the reason or reasons for his resignation, but they aren't hard to figure out. First off, while he had been off on active duty, one of his young children had died. He may be thinking at that point, my duty is to my family. Right. I've done my duty for my country. And although he never seems like an egotistical sort, we all have egos to some degree.
Sure.
He had certainly seen himself passed over for promotion and oftentimes jobs given to frankly less able, less experienced men.
Yeah.
You know, here's a guy who's led a hard fighting combat regiment since December of 1861. He's seen them through hard fights at Second Bull Run, Gettysburg, Wauhatchie down in Georgia, and could reasonably have expected to have become a brigadier general long before this. Congress does finally give him a brevet brigadier general's rank, along with about 1 million other guys in the I think it's March of 1865, I think, when Congress basically just says, here's a big list of unrecognized brigade commanders. Let's make them all brigadier generals. Smith didn't get much out of that other than people can call him general for the rest of his life, but it doesn't really buy you
no
Danish.
Pay or anything.
No cup of coffee or Danish or anything that comes with that. No. He goes back to railroading and goes very far, in fact, executive vice president of the B&O Railroad. And then he dies in, I believe it's 1903. He's buried in Columbus, Ohio these days. But that's Orland Smith. His brigade left behind, I think, a record of really good performance in both victories and defeats. These are not units that you see running from the enemy. They're fighting men. They're stalwart troops who could be relied on in every fight they'd fought in over the course of over 3 years of war.
Real quick, your ancestors, I can't remember if you said, did they die here?
Yeah.
Both?
Yeah. They're both buried up in the National Cemetery here.
Did you have other ancestors who were in that unit that survived?
No. These are the only two. They were brothers-in-law. My great aunt would have learned of the death of her kid brother and her husband same day. That would have been a rough day in Limerick, Ohio.
Yeah.
I did have several other Civil War ancestors, but none that I know of at Gettysburg.
All right. We have one more caller who just snuck in. So let's say hello. I don't have a name there. It says End Lawn, but I don't think your name is Lawn. Maybe Dawn. I don't know. Anyway, 724, you're on the air.
Hi, my name's Dan. You might know me as Lieutenant Dan.
Lieutenant Dan.
I do have a question for Stu. I've read that Culp's Hill has the claim that the longest continuous fighting of the battle occurred at Culp's Hill.
Yeah.
But
no.
You mentioned the continuous skirmish. No.
No.
Wouldn't the area that...
Go ahead, Dan. There's like a weird delay, so when we talk, it interrupts you, but we don't mean to. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Wouldn't the area that Smith's brigade occupied, the continuous skirmishing happening there, wouldn't that be the longest continuous?
Oh, it absolutely is.
Battle?
It absolutely is. It's essentially every daylight hour on July 2nd and 3rd, and then for a bit in the morning on the 4th. So I guess if you differentiate between, if you want to give Culp's Hill the most sustained infantry fighting on a large scale in the battle, because this Smith's Ridge fight, we're talking companies and regiments, whereas Culp's Hill on the morning of July 3rd, we're talking brigades and divisions, so much bigger forces. But yeah, if you want to identify who is under fire and who is firing the most continuously at the battle, you kind of have to look at Orland Smith's brigade and their opponents, mostly Perrin's brigade, some of Thomas's Georgia brigade. Those are the guys who see 2+ days of continuous musketry.
That's a really good question, Dan, because it's interesting because for the longest time in my lifetime and Gettysburg journey or whatever you want to call it, education, everything was all about, for the longest time since the movie, Little Round Top and Joshua Chamberlain. And then seems like historians my age, started going, okay, there's more to this story. And it's not exactly that Chamberlain saved the day single-handedly. What about Colonel Ireland on Culp's Hill? He was the far right flank. And look what he had to go through. And look what, Greene's brigade had to go through. And then Culp's Hill had the longest fighting and everything. And so now we're all starting to go, yeah, Culp's Hill is where it's at. Like Culp's Hill, wow, look at all the stuff that they went through and look how many hours they fought. And nobody ever talked about Smith's Brigade and Smith's Ridge, right? Because Cole Park is there. It's hard to talk about what you can't see.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to talk about that, thanks to you coming on here. And it's just going to go like wildfire, spread across the land. And people are going to be like, wow, Smith's Brigade. And then Dan brings up the point that maybe they were fighting the longest. And I think your distinction was good. Longest large scale, Culp's Hill. Longest fighting for one unit, these guys.
Yeah, these guys.
Yeah, good job, Dan. I like that.
Yep.
Anything else?
You're right on.
Well, I get a better perspective too, that it wasn't only the artillery on Cemetery Hill that prevented the attack happening there, but it was the fighting that the Union skirmishers put up that made that attack not happen right at that point.
Well, that's definitely part of the equation.
Yeah. Dan, where are you from?
Perryopolis.
Say what?
Perryopolis out in Fayette County near Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay. Very good. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for the call, and hope to see you at an event sometime in 2025.
Oh, you will.
Okay, good. Oh, see, that sounds scary. You don't come armed.
Yeah. No axes.
It's like, oh, you will. Dan, thank you very much. Have a great day. Merry Christmas to you. Okay, well, that's it there for us, Stu. Thank you very much for coming on.
You're most welcome.
I really enjoy this. You got to come back and talk about something else. What else do you like to talk about?
Oh, well, you mean in the Civil War realm, I assume, right?
I'm in Gettysburg. You know what a lot of people have been asking for this year? Well, so this past year we did Brigade episodes about brigades like we're doing today.
I got about 20 of them.
Okay, well, so now people are saying we would love it if you would do some biographical episodes about individuals. We did one years ago with Jim Pangburn about John Gordon. And that's the one people keep pointing to. They keep saying, I love the John Gordon episode. You got to do more like that. So if you have any individuals, but we're going to continue with brigades, but if you have any individuals, we're going to start peppering those in too.
Well, yeah, I could definitely look into that. They do have a bunch of brigade-specific stuff. Lockwood's Brigade, which never gets a whole lot of attention.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Is a strong interest area for me. Carroll's Brigade, which we've occasionally made mention of here. I've done a good bit with Perrin's Brigade and also with the Florida Brigade.
Right.
So there's a bunch of stuff that...
Lockwood's Brigade would be great because nobody ever does that. And Carroll's after that. So let's do that. Let's do the next one we'll get you scheduled for is Lockwood.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that. That would be cool. Okay, great. Good. As far as all of you go, thank you very much for watching us live. And those of you who participated with the super likes or super chats, thank you for those. And the phone calls, thank you for those as well. Otherwise, that's it, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. All right. We're done.
At Digital History Pioneers Foundation, we are about grassroots history on digital platforms. That means we are about podcasters, documentarians, YouTubers, and even TikTokers. All of these creators are out there trying to share their love of history with the public. They don't need ideas. They need funding, both from viewers and corporate donors. DH Pioneer's initial funding focus is on the Civil War era, with a special emphasis on the Addressing Gettysburg podcast. So be a vital part of the unique content Addressing Gettysburg has in store by donating at dhpioneers.com and help bring your love of history to the people. Digital History Pioneers is an IRS Section 501c3 approved charitable corporation that makes any donation tax deductible to the fullest extent of the law.
Our hearts so stout have got us fame, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Gary Owen in glory. Instead